One moment I was just a teenager enduring my parents' lessons. The next I was abandoned at a gas station. This is the story of how I found freedom and justice. Hey everyone! Before we jump into today's story, just a quick favor, if you enjoy content like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It's completely free, helps support the channel, and ensures you never miss out on more incredible stories. Alright, let's get started. It was a summer day like any other. The sun beat down relentlessly on the highway and the air was thick with the heat of the afternoon. I was dozing off in the back seat of the old, worn-out sedan, the hum of the engine lulling me into a state of half-sleep. My parents, John and Mary, were in the front, engaged in their usual chatter about trivial things. My older sister, Sabrina, was busy with her phone, plugged into her world. It had been a long drive. We were coming back from visiting Sabrina at college, a 4-hour trip that had already drained us. But it was summer, and I was still a teenager, still a child, or at least I thought I was. Little did I know that today would be the day my entire life changed. We pulled off at an isolated gas station in the middle of nowhere, the kind of place where the air smelled of burnt rubber and gasoline. My father turned to me, his voice cutting through the fog of sleep. "Go get me a coffee," he said. It wasn't a request. It was an order, just like everything else in our house. I begrudgingly pulled myself out of the car and made my way to the cashier inside. The man behind the counter was old, frail-looking, and sweated like he had just run a marathon. He told me the coffee machine was broken, so I had to wait while he brewed a fresh pot. I didn't mind. I wasn't in a rush. But when I came back outside, the car was gone. At first, I thought it was a joke. Maybe they had moved to another pump, or maybe they were messing with me. But then I saw it. The old sedan, the one that had carried me through so many road trips and memories, was pulling out of the station. They were driving away. Without me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as I stood there, holding a now-cold cup of coffee. My parents, the people who had brought me into this world, were driving away, abandoning me at a gas station in the middle of nowhere. I tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail. I sent a text to my mom. No response. Then I got one back. "Let's see how long it takes you to get home. Consider this a lesson in problem-solving." I stood there for a while, staring at the spot where the car had disappeared. The heat of the summer day seemed to press down on me even harder now, and the world around me felt smaller, tighter, like it was closing in. The text hit me like a punch in the gut, its impact sharp and unforgiving. I stood there for a moment, phone still in my hand, staring at the words that blinked back at me. My chest tightened as the reality of the situation sunk in. It wasn't just a prank. It wasn't just a lesson. This wasn't the first time they'd done something like this to me. I could feel the walls closing in, memories rushing back. All the times they had made me feel small, insignificant, like I wasn't worth the time or the effort. 2 years earlier, when I was 14, they'd locked me out of the house because I'd gotten a C+ in chemistry. A damn C+. "Maybe a night in the cold will help you focus on your studies," my father had said. The cold that night had been biting, stinging my skin, but the emotional cold I felt in my chest was even worse. I was just a kid, a teenager, struggling to fit in and figure things out. But none of that mattered to them. All they saw was failure. They didn't care that I was trying. All they cared about was controlling me, pushing me to be what they thought was best, what they thought was tough love. I remember having to break into the garage to sleep that night. I had no choice. I had nowhere else to go. No place that felt safe. I curled up on the cold concrete floor of the garage, listening to the sound of the wind rattling the window panes and the echoes of my own breathing. It was the only place I could find solace, even if it was just for a night. But the next morning, when they found out, their response was more anger, more punishment. They made me pay for the broken window with the money I earned at McDonald's. The money I had worked hard for, slinging burgers and fries to people who didn't even care about me. And there they were, acting like I was the one who had wronged them, acting like I had done something unforgivable. Now, standing in front of this gas station, the bitter taste of that past experience was more vivid than ever. My parents hadn't just left me behind, they had abandoned me long before today. This was just another lesson. Another twisted game they had played with my life. And I had had enough. Something inside me snapped. It was like a switch flipped, the final straw that broke my back. No more. I was done. Done being their punching bag. Done with their selfish, cruel idea of love. Done with the years of manipulation. The emotional abuse that left scars I couldn't even see but could feel every time I looked at myself in the mirror. I was 16 and I had reached my breaking point. I had saved up about $200 from my summer job. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get me out of here, away from them. I was ready to leave everything behind and start fresh. I wasn't a little kid anymore. I wasn't going to let them control me. I would survive on my own. I had to. I walked back inside the gas station, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to keep my composure. The cashier looked up from behind the counter, his face unreadable as I approached. I could feel his eyes on me, but I didn't care. I wasn't here for sympathy. I wasn't here to make a friend. I was here for one thing, to get away. "Where's the nearest bus station?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "About 2 miles down that way," he said, pointing toward the end of a long, dusty road. I nodded, turning to leave. My mind was spinning, my thoughts racing, but I couldn't afford to think too much. If I did, I might stop. If I stopped, I might stay. And staying meant giving in. I wasn't going to give in anymore. I wasn't going to let them break me. As I walked back outside, the weight of everything I was leaving behind hit me like a freight train. I wasn't just leaving a gas station in the middle of nowhere, I was leaving my family. I was leaving the people who were supposed to care for me, the people who had promised to love me unconditionally. But their love had always been conditional, based on what they wanted, not what I needed. And that love had hurt me more times than I could count. I took a deep breath and forced myself to keep walking, my feet crunching against the gravel as I made my way down the road. The sun was starting to set, casting a golden hue over everything, but it only made everything feel more surreal, like I was walking away from a dream I could never get back. I fumbled for my phone in my pocket and dialed Aunt Clara's number. She was the only person I could count on, the only one who had ever treated me like I mattered. She had always been there for me, even when the rest of the family turned their backs. She had been cut off from the family years ago, after she bought me a phone when they had taken mine away as punishment. That had been the final straw for them. She was the only one who saw through their tough love act and treated me like a human being. I felt the familiar tension in my chest as the phone rang. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I needed her to answer. "Hello?" Aunt Clara's voice came through, warm and familiar, just like I remembered. "Aunt Clara, it's Scott," I said, trying to keep my voice calm even though everything inside me felt like it was falling apart. "I need help." "Scott? What happened?" she asked, her tone immediately filled with concern. I hesitated, my throat tightening. I didn't even know how to explain what had just happened. How could I? How could I tell her that my parents had left me at a gas station? Abandoned me like I was nothing? How could I explain that they had turned their love into a weapon, used it to control me, to break me? "They left me," I finally said, "at a gas station. Just drove off. Like I don't matter." Aunt Clara was quiet for a moment, and then she spoke. "Don't worry, Scott. I'm coming. I'll send you a ride. Just stay there. We'll figure this out. You're not alone." The relief I felt was immediate, like a weight had been lifted off my chest. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't completely alone. I wasn't completely broken. "I'll be here," I said, my voice trembling for the first time. I hung up and took a moment to collect myself. There were still so many things I didn't know, so many things I couldn't figure out. But I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't going back. I wasn't going to let them win. I blocked my parents' numbers and turned off my phone. I didn't need their excuses anymore. I didn't need their guilt trips, their twisted sense of what was right and wrong. I made my way to the bus station where I would wait not for my family, but for the future I had to build. A future where I was free from their control, free to be who I was, without their suffocating grip around my neck. As I sat on the bus, watching the countryside blur past, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. I could breathe. I could think. I could finally start to live my life on my own terms. And no one, not even my parents, could take that away from me. The wheels of the bus turned, and with them, my future began to take shape. When I finally stepped off the bus and walked toward Aunt Clara's house, it felt like stepping into another world. The old house, with its cracked window frames and the worn-out red bricks, didn't look like much at first glance. But the moment I walked inside, everything shifted. It was warm physically, emotionally, mentally. Everything I had been missing for so long. There was no judgment here. There were no harsh words, no manipulative tactics, no tough love lessons to be learned. Just calm, quiet acceptance. Aunt Clara wasn't like my parents. She never made me feel like I wasn't enough. I didn't need to pretend to be someone I wasn't. She never told me how I should feel, how I should act, or how I should live my life. She just let me be. And that made all the difference. I remember the first night I stayed at her house. She made me a warm dinner, nothing fancy, just some simple soup and a slice of bread. But it was the first meal I'd had in a long time that didn't come with strings attached, that didn't come with a side of guilt or manipulation. It was just food. And it was the best damn soup I'd ever eaten. That night, I lay in the guest room, listening to the sounds of the house settling, the creaks and groans of the old wooden floorboards. I felt safe there for the first time in years. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to close my eyes and not worry about what would happen the next day or the next week or the next month. I could breathe. I could finally breathe. In the days that followed, Aunt Clara helped me get back on my feet. She didn't ask a lot of questions about what had happened or why I was there. She knew. She didn't need to know everything. She just provided a place where I could heal, where I could start rebuilding myself from the ground up. I finished high school there, despite my lingering fears that I wouldn't be able to handle it. I had been through so much, so many years of barely scraping by, of falling through the cracks, that I didn't know if I had the strength to complete it. But Aunt Clara pushed me. She encouraged me when I thought I couldn't go any further, and she supported me when I wanted to quit. She was always there, her calm presence a stark contrast to the chaos I had left behind. When I graduated and received my GED, it wasn't just a piece of paper to me. It was a symbol of everything I had fought for, everything I had survived. That little certificate meant more to me than any degree could. It was proof that I could overcome, that I could keep going no matter how hard the past had been. I had made it through, and nothing could take that away from me. But after high school, I knew I couldn't stop there. I needed to build something for myself. I needed to create a life that was mine, free from the shadow of my parents, free from the abuse and the manipulation. I knew that if I didn't do anything, I would always be trapped in the past, chained to the things they had done to me. So I started working. Odd jobs at first, landscaping, waiting tables, anything that would bring in some money. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy. But it was a start. I used every opportunity to learn. I asked questions, I observed, I took mental notes, and slowly I started building a skill set. I learned about construction, about how buildings were put together, about how everything from the ground up required patience, precision, and hard work. I loved it. The physical labor felt good. It gave me something concrete to focus on. I could see the results of my efforts, and that was something I had never had before. I was building something real, something I could be proud of. My hands ached at the end of the day, but it was a satisfying ache. Every brick I laid, every beam I nailed, every wall I helped construct, these were my accomplishments, my achievements. Eventually, I saved enough money to start my own business. It wasn't anything fancy. It wasn't some huge corporation or a flashy startup. It was a small construction company, just me at first, a few tools, and a dream. But it was mine, and that was all that mattered. I remember the first project I took on. It was a small remodeling job for a local cafe. Nothing huge, but I was nervous, terrified even. What if I messed it up? What if I didn't know enough? What if I wasn't cut out for this? But then I thought about everything I had been through, about all the times I had been knocked down and kept getting up, and I realized something. I could do this. I had already survived so much worse. The project went better than I had expected. The cafe owner was thrilled with the results, and that feeling of success was like nothing else. It was proof that I could make this work. It was proof that I wasn't a failure, that I wasn't doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past. I kept working, kept building, and soon my business grew. It wasn't easy, but nothing worth having ever was. Every step forward felt like a victory. Every new client was a reminder of how far I had come. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. I was thriving. And through it all, I started to heal. Slowly at first, but over time I began to forgive myself for the things I had been through, for the ways I had let them hurt me, for the times I had let their cruelty define me. I learned to see my worth again, to believe that I deserved better, and that was the first step in truly freeing myself. But as much as I had moved forward, as much as I had grown and built this new life, I never forgot what they had done to me. That part of my life was still with me even though I tried to push it away. It had shaped me in ways I couldn't even understand at the time. The scars they left weren't visible, but they were real. And I knew that one day they would come looking for me. I didn't know when or how, but I knew they would. Maybe they would show up at my door, begging for help. Maybe they would find me through my business. Or maybe they would reach out to Aunt Clara, desperate to get in touch with me. It didn't matter, because when that day came, I would be ready. I had rebuilt myself, brick by brick. I had created a life that was mine, and I wasn't going to let them take it away. I had survived them, and now I was living for myself. It happened sooner than I expected. I was sitting at my desk, the low hum of the office around me as I reviewed contracts for a new project. My mind was absorbed in the numbers and details, the constant flow of work that had become my escape from everything. It was all I could do to keep the past from swallowing me whole. But then, the buzz of my phone broke through the noise of my thoughts, and everything changed. 39 missed calls. The numbers flashing on the screen meant nothing to me, but the ones from Sabrina, 3 in total, sent a wave of cold dread crashing over me. Sabrina. I hadn't heard from her in years. Not since I left, not since I walked away from everything they had done to me. I thought I was done with them. I thought I was free. But now there she was reaching out. A pang of guilt tightened in my chest, but it was quickly swallowed by anger, by confusion. Why now? Why after all this time? What could they possibly want? I hesitated for a moment, then hit play on the voicemail. Her voice came through, shaky and full of emotion. Scott, please pick up. Mom and Dad found you. They're spiraling. Just call me back. Okay? I felt a wave of nausea rise in my stomach. I didn't need to hear more. I had heard enough. They had found me. It was as if my past had come crashing back into my life with a vengeance. Like they were clawing their way through the years, trying to drag me back into their toxic orbit. I stood there for a moment, my hands still gripping the phone, frozen. The walls of my office, once a refuge, now felt like they were closing in. I thought I had left them behind. I thought I had escaped. But somehow they had found me, tracked me down like I was just another mistake they could fix with their manipulation and guilt. And as much as I tried to ignore it, the weight of their presence in my life began to suffocate me once again. I forced myself to breathe, to focus, but the next voicemail came through, and I couldn't stop myself from listening. It was from my father. You think you're better than us, don't you? His voice was slurred, thick with what I could only assume was a mix of alcohol and rage. With your fancy business? We made you who you are. You owe us, Scott. The words hit me like a slap in the face, and for a moment, everything around me seemed to fade into the background. The walls of my office, the steady hum of the air conditioning, the flicker of the fluorescent lights above me. All of it faded until it was just me and my father's voice, laced with anger and entitlement. The room felt smaller now, suffocating. I could feel my pulse quicken, my chest tightening as the memories flooded back, the cruelty, the control, the constant pushing to prove my worth to people who didn't care about me. It wasn't just the words themselves. It was the tone, the insinuation. They had always believed that my success was theirs. That everything I had achieved was because of them, because of their tough love. They never understood. They never would. For a split second, I felt the familiar pull of guilt. I felt the weight of their expectations pressing on me as if I was still that 16-year-old boy, lost and desperate for their approval. But this time, the feeling was different. This time, it wasn't a cry for help or a plea for forgiveness. This time, I wasn't that scared kid anymore. This time, I was a man. I couldn't breathe for a moment. The suffocating pressure of their words trying to drag me back into their web of manipulation. But I fought it. I had fought too hard to get here, to rebuild my life. I wasn't going to let them undo it all with a few words. I stood up from my desk, pacing the floor, trying to ground myself. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I wasn't going to let them control me again. I had come too far, worked too hard. The man I was now wasn't the same scared boy they used to control. I was stronger. I was different. I played the voicemail again, listening carefully to the anger in my father's voice. You owe us, Scott. The words echoed in my head, but now they felt hollow, empty. They no longer had the power to hurt me. They no longer had the power to make me feel small. I looked at the phone in my hand, the screen lit up with their names, and I realized something. They were desperate. They weren't calling because they missed me. They weren't calling because they cared. They were calling because they needed something. They needed me to be their savior, to rescue them from the mess they had created. They needed me to fix everything they had broken. But I wasn't that person anymore. I wasn't their solution. I wasn't their escape. I sat back down at my desk, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. My mind raced, my emotions a tangled mess of anger, frustration, and a strange sense of relief. For so long, I had feared this moment. I had feared that they would come back into my life, that they would find me and pull me back into their chaos. But now, as I sat there, I realized something important. I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't afraid of them. I had built my own life, a life that was mine, free from their control. And I wasn't going to let them take it away from me. Not now. Not ever. I hit the block button on my phone, shutting them out for good. I wasn't going to let their calls drag me back into their toxic web. I wasn't going to fall for their manipulation again. The phone buzzed with another message, another call, another attempt to reach me. But I didn't look at it. I didn't need to. I had made my decision. For so long, I had thought that they were the ones with the power, that they held the key to my past, my future, my very soul. But I realized now that the only person who had power over my life was me. I had taken control, and no one, not even my parents, was going to take that from me. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes for a moment. The past, with all its pain and betrayal, was behind me. I had survived them. I had survived everything they had done to me. And now I was moving forward. I had built a life that was mine, and I was going to keep it that way. One evening, not long after I had blocked all my parents' numbers and things seemed to be falling back into a routine, my phone buzzed again. I was sitting in my office, glancing through financial reports when a new message popped up on the screen. This time, it wasn't a call from my dad, it was a message from Sabrina. "Scott, I just want to talk to you. I know you're angry, but our family needs you. Mom and Dad aren't doing well. They're drowning in debt. Please, give me a chance to talk. I'll meet you at Denny's tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. Can you come? Just this once." I stood up from my desk, my heart racing, unsure why everything around me suddenly felt like it was spinning. Sabrina. Even though I tried to distance myself from everything to do with my family, I couldn't deny that I still missed her. After all, Sabrina was my sister. But the pain of the past, of what they had done to me, surged back. I didn't want to fall into that old trap. Yet, a part of me couldn't ignore it. The feeling that she was the only one left in the family who still cared about me. The desire to know the truth about what was really going on with Mom and Dad, it all made it impossible for me to ignore. And after everything, I knew I had to face the past. If I had made it this far, maybe I could face them without being hurt again. I thought about it for a long time before deciding to reply. "Okay, tomorrow, 7 a.m., Denny's. But you have to come alone. No one else." Those words were sent as a final conclusion to everything that had come before and a step toward what was coming next. Sabrina would come and I would finally know what she was after. How could I forget the look in her eyes when we were kids, when we were still a family? But I also couldn't forget what had happened. This would be the final meeting, and it would determine everything. The meeting with Sabrina was set for the next day. I was already there when she walked in. She looked the same, tall, dark hair falling around her shoulders, but older. The lines around her eyes told a story of stress and worry, of sleepless nights. Her movements were jittery, as though she were caught between wanting to say something and fearing the consequences of saying it. She slid into the booth across from me, her hands fidgeting with the napkin on the table. Folding it, unfolding it, smoothing it out, and folding it again. I waited, letting her collect her thoughts, but the tension in the air was palpable. I had no idea what to expect. But I could already feel the weight of the situation bearing down on both of us. Sabrina was always the emotional one, the one who felt things deeply even when she tried to hide it. But now, it was like I was facing the broken remnants of the girl I once knew. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was strained but firm. "They're losing the house," she blurted out. Her words tumbling out like they had been held back for far too long. "Dad's been gambling. Mom's maxed out their cards. They found your company's website and they want money." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't need to. The shock of hearing it was enough to leave me speechless. They wanted money. After everything they had put me through, after everything I had lost because of them, they thought they could just waltz back into my life and ask for help? After all the manipulation, the emotional blackmail, the years of making me feel worthless? I felt a surge of anger, but I swallowed it down. This was bigger than my resentment, bigger than my past. This was about something far more important than my own feelings. It was about power, control. It always had been. And this time I wouldn't let them take it back. I pulled out my phone and texted them. I'll meet you at my office tomorrow. Don't bring anyone else. The next day, they showed up right on time, but it wasn't with apologies. It wasn't with remorse. It wasn't a tearful, heartfelt reunion where we could talk through everything, heal the wounds of the past. No, it was with demands, with entitlement. My father was the first to speak, his voice carrying that same angry, condescending tone I remembered all too well. You think you're better than us now? His words were dripping with bitterness. With your fancy business and your money, we made you who you are, Scott. You owe us. You owe us for everything. My heart didn't race like it used to when he spoke to me like that. There was no fear in my chest anymore. No desire to please him. No yearning for his approval. I had already shed that part of myself. That scared kid? He was gone. I was a man now, and I was done playing their games. I let him ramble on, barely listening until he was finished. There was no anger in me now, just a cold detachment that shocked even me. It was a feeling I had never allowed myself to embrace before, but now it was all I had. The past had taught me that my emotions could be used against me. They were my weakness, but now, they were my strength. I've done my homework, I said, cutting him off mid-sentence. I know what you've been up to. I know how deep you've dug yourselves into this mess. And frankly, I don't care. Their faces flickered with surprise. They weren't expecting that. They thought I would cave. They thought they could still manipulate me into doing what they wanted. But I wasn't the same person who had begged them for attention, for love, for validation. I leaned forward, locking eyes with my father and mother, both of them standing there, eyes wide, as if they couldn't comprehend what I was about to say. The house you kicked me out of? It's mine now, I said, a small, cold smile tugging at the corners of my lips. I bought it at auction, and I'm tearing it down next month to make way for a new development. The shock on their faces was priceless. It was like I had slapped them across the face. They didn't know what hit them. The silence between us was deafening. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, but I wasn't afraid. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment I took control of my life. Once and for all. I wasn't going to play by their rules anymore. They weren't going to manipulate me into feeling guilty. You have 30 days to vacate the property, I continued. My voice steady and calm, though my insides were racing. I'm demolishing it. I don't want to hear from either of you again. They stood there, rooted to the spot, unable to comprehend what was happening. My mother opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. I didn't need to hear their excuses, their pleas. Not anymore. I stood up and grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair. Goodbye, I said, my voice colder than I had ever heard it before. And don't try to contact me again. I turned my back on them and walked out of the room, leaving them standing there in stunned silence. The day of the demolition came faster than I thought. I stood at the edge of the property, my hands in my pockets, watching as the bulldozer rolled onto the site. It was surreal. A part of me had always wanted to see this day come. To watch as the house they had forced me out of was torn down. But another part of me felt nothing. No joy, no satisfaction. It was just another step in my journey. Another brick removed from the foundation of a past that had no place in my future. As the bulldozer's massive arm swung down and crushed the first wall, I watched my parents' legacy crumble to dust. Everything they had built was coming down in front of me. The house that had been the center of all their power, all their control, was gone. And in its place, there would be something new, something I would build, brick by brick, with my own hands. Something they could never take away from me. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, watching the destruction unfold, the sound of metal against concrete ringing in my ears. There was something cathartic about it, watching everything they had built, everything they had used to hurt me, disappear into dust. It was like I was watching the last of the old me die, the one who had been afraid, the one who had been ashamed. And when the house was finally reduced to rubble, I turned around and walked away, feeling lighter than I had in years. The past was over. The demons were gone. And for the first time in a long time, I was finally free.